All right, we just talked about NAT. Let's talk about something a little bit different. Still about IP addresses and IP address management, perhaps, but let's talk about DNS and DHCP services. Now, we've got both of these that we can enable inside of NSX, inside of our gateways. And, this gives us some additional flexibility in what we're doing with our networks. So we have a DHCP server that we can enable. This DHCP server is going to be able to provide DHCP addresses to clients on segments. We can also build a DHCP relay in order to use maybe the infrastructure you already have, because let's face it, you probably already have a DHCP server somewhere. We've got choices. I love having choices. So we've got DHCP servers, we've got DHCP relays, we've actually got two different flavors of DHCP server. We've got a segment server, which is localized to one segment only, and attached only to that segment. We've also got a configuration where we can attach a server to a gateway, say a tier 1 gateway, and provide DHCP services to all of the different segments on that gateway, attached to that gateway if you so desire. So we've got a couple of different DHCP server configs and one DHCP relay configuration. So the local server is simply attached to an individual segment. So if I've got two segments, I need to create two local server profiles and set them up completely differently from one another, completely separately from one another. And we can attach these to VLAN segments or overlay segments, whatever you might need. A DHCP relay, well, that's going to be configured on the gateway, and we'll simply collect DHCP requests and unicast them off to a DHCP server in your environment. Right? Very flexible, very handy if you've got your own DHCP server. And then a gateway DHCP server, well, this is going to apply to a gateway. And so if I've got 2 or 3 or 4 segments, I can use a single DHCP server on the gateway to provide DHCP to those segments rather than setting up lots of individual DHCP servers. So again, flexibility is the name of the game here. To build this out, I have to create a DHCP profile. I have to assign that profile either directly to a segment or to a gateway. And then I need to configure, right? I need to configure my DHCP pools and any DHCP options I might have and all those kinds of things that I might be doing. So creating a DHCP profile, this is where I'm going to specify server or relay. And I can do that right in the networking and DHCP UI. Or I can build out my DHCP server, give it a name, give it a service IP address, or give it a relay IP address. Where am I going to relay these? Depending on whether I'm looking at a server or a relay. If I want to create a gateway, a local DHCP server, a segment local DHCP server, in my segment configuration, I push the add DHCP config button, or set DHCP config button rather, and configure up the server type. I can also set a relay here directly on the segment as well. But here we're looking at a DHCP server, and we select the profile we created. And then below this, we can start to configure out our DHCP settings. On a gateway, if I edit the gateway, we have our DHCP config that I can set, where I can choose server or relay and the appropriate profile type. Then I can go in and configure, right? So whether I'm choosing a segment local DHCP server or a gateway DHCP server, I still have to configure my DHCP options, and that's going to be done at the segment level in my set DHCP config in the segment. And I'm going to set my DNS name or my domain name and my DNS servers and whether or not we automatically want to set the default gateway. I can go into the options and set all kinds of DHCP options. We've got a very full-featured DHCP server capability. So I can add additional DHCP options as is necessary for my requirements. Now, DNS, we don't have a full-on DNS server. We have a DNS, a conditional caching DNS forwarder, meaning that we will forward DNS requests, right? We'll listen for DNS requests on our gateway. We will forward those requests to a DNS server of your choosing, but we can do that conditionally based on FQDN, meaning that maybe I have a request for my lab domain. Well, that goes to my lab DNS servers. And if I have another request for my production domain, that request can be sent to my production DNS servers and so on. So we can set up conditions to say, forward these requests over here and those requests over there, instead of just forwarding off to one DNS server if you've got multiples. So the DNS forwarder is flexible because now we don't have to necessarily allow DNS traffic outside of my perimeter, maybe outside of my tier 1 gateway perimeter. We can use this as just a cache, a relay. Instead of putting that load completely on my external DNS servers, I can take some of that load for the clients behind the gateway and just let them do their thing, right? I can take that load off and simplify my external DNS servers a little bit. Now, I have to create some zones, so I'm going to create what we call an FQDN zone, or maybe several. I'm going to create a default zone, and then we create our forwarder service and make sure we have external connectivity set up. And then, if I'm using DHCP, set my DHCP clients to use the DNS forwarder. Otherwise, configure my clients to use the DNS forwarder IP address. So configuring zones, I create default zones, and the default zones are I don't have a conditional rule, so let me go ahead and forward the packet over there. And then I have FQDN zones, which are my conditional forwarders, right? So for this FQDN, or for these FQDNs, forward to this other DNS server. That's what my different zones are for, right? So where am I going to forward? And then I need to go into networking and DNS and add a DNS service and specify the IP address that I'm going to listen on for my DNS service. I'm going to specify the gateway on which it's going to live, and I specify my default zone, as well as any conditional zones I want to consume. That way we can start forwarding packets around. Now, once that's done, I need to establish DNS forwarder connectivity, and that probably will mean setting out route advertisement, right? Advertising the DNS forwarder route from the tier 0 gateway, or from the tier 1 gateway probably to the tier 0 gateway, and then redistributing that route out to the physical infrastructure. But that's not the only way we can solve this particular problem. I could set up a NAT, right, a source NAT for my DNS forwarder to change where it looks like it's coming from if I don't want to advertise maybe that NAT server prefix out into my physical network. I can simply set up a NAT and advertise an IP address that I so desire. Now, configuring DHCP to allocate that DNS server, we've got a DNS server entry in our DNS option, or DHCP options. So I just set that up to use that DNS forwarder address that we defined. So setting up DHCP and DNS is really, really useful. In some cases, it's really, really simple. I may or may not have a requirement for that. So think about that. More tools in our toolbox are better than fewer tools in our toolbox. So we've got some really great stuff. Come back in the next video. We're going to start talking about a big tool in our toolbox, the NSX Advanced Load Balancer. We'll see you there.